discussion. I'm excited to be here. I'm nervous. I've been working on these ideas for like 3 years, and Lisa said, hey, do this thing this week in September, and I'm like, well, I'm not ready yet, but this will be a good deadline. So here we go. This is the first time I've talked about this in public, so be kind, please. It's just a proposal. I'm not going to force anyone to do anything. My name is Sarah Lorenz, and I'm a longtime Ann Arbor resident. I was actually born in Ann Arbor at the old St. Joe Hospital. I have some very early memories of being on campus for events with my parents. I grew up in Ypsilanti Township, right between Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor. Lived in Wayne County for about 5 years, Garden City, near the airport, and then moved back to Ann Arbor in the year 2000. My husband and I decided to move back to be closer to Ann Arbor, and we were like, hey, we like Ann Arbor, it's fun, let's go there. Kind of on a fluke, you know? So you can tell, so we were actually pretty low income at that period in our lives, and the fact that we could just like on a fluke decide to move to Ann Arbor tells you something different. So my husband has been in the trades his whole life. Now he's a general contractor, but his great-grandparents came to Ann Arbor. His great-grandfather moved to Ann Arbor from Holland, Michigan in the 40s to take a job as an electrician at the University of Michigan. And he and his wife bought a house in Burns Park in 1942 for $3,000. And we only could wish that they still had that house because they paid $3,000 for it, and I looked this week on Zillow, it's valued at $1,085,000. So they ran it as a boarding house. They lived there and raised their kids there, but they would rent rooms to students. So someone can study the appreciation on that. I looked it up once, I can't remember what it was. I have been in education, so thus my low income status. So we came here, my husband was really good with his hands. You know, I was teaching, and then I stopped teaching for a while when I had kids, and because he was so good at renovating houses, we were like, hey, we can fix up our house and sell it and make money. And that was a huge revelation to us. So we started monetizing our homes, which has come back to bite us, but at the time it seemed like a great idea. So we kept doing that, and then he eventually became a general contractor. And then I was continuing in my educational career and doing school reform work when that was the term in vogue, traveling around to a lot of districts and doing sort of systems change work, which was really interesting to me. Then I worked at Eastern Michigan University for about a decade doing educational research and federal grant proposals. But as he was developing his small business, I kept thinking, like, so is the only way as a small business in Ann Arbor to create high-end housing? Is that the only way to run your business? Are you always just flipping houses or renovating for people who have a lot of money? Isn't there any other way to have a small business in this field? And so I kept thinking about that and reading different things. I found this cool book about pocket neighborhoods, little tiny infill neighborhoods with 6 or 8 or a dozen houses. I was like, oh my gosh, can't we build a pocket neighborhood? And then I started talking about this with people who knew, and they would laugh at me. And they're like, no, no, you cannot build a pocket neighborhood here. So I continued doing more research. I started going to some conferences at U of M and met some other really interesting people, one of which was Peter Allen, and he's a local developer, and I started talking with him and more, and realized that we both had ideas, complementary ideas about what needed to happen. We needed to have more housing, more different kinds of housing. So in 2019, we created a new nonprofit called the Equitable Ann Arbor Land Trust. And so we have been having meetings with all kinds of people and drinking tons of Zingerman's coffee and all other kinds of delicacies like from York. And it's been a lot of fun. We have all kinds of ideas. We're big thinkers. I love it. But for the past 3 years, I've really started to zero in on this idea of a community land trust. A few years ago, I also got my real estate license to help my husband with his business, and so I was doing a few real estate transactions on the side. I would always go to tons of open houses. I used to go to house tours with my mom. So I've been in probably thousands of Ann Arbor homes, and I was always curious about this market because this market is different than other markets, outlying areas, other markets around the country. And so I also started hearing about Vienna, Austria. How many of you have heard of Vienna and their housing? Yes, and so I started watching YouTube videos about Vienna and vacation. And so I became convinced that the private market in a place like this is never again going to build middle and lower income houses. And it wasn't just a matter of increasing the supply, that wasn't going to be enough. So I started doing more and more research, and today I want to tell you about what I found and what I think we can take from different communities around the country and the world and how we might be able to make a difference here in Ann Arbor. So this is our agenda. I brought a little clock with me, so I'm almost done with my introductions. We're going to talk just briefly, because I think if you're here, you probably already agree that we have some kind of a problem with housing. So mainly we want to get into how might we tailor this idea of a community land trust for Ann Arbor. How could we make this work? And so I'm going to talk for about a half an hour. If you have a really burning question, like I'm just totally not making sense, you can ask a question. But mainly we're going to do some Q&A, 12:45, and then I think there are 3 big public policy issues here if we want to move forward with this kind of idea. So I thought we might have some discussion. We could have large group discussion, or we could break into groups and discuss some of these ideas that I'm going to talk about. So that's where we are. I just wanted to get a sense of who's here today before I jump in. So do we have any public officials here today? Oh, one right there. Awesome. City council member. Do we have any city staff here today?
I'm not here in that capacity, but yes.
Okay, great. Do we have any University of Michigan faculty, staff, students? Okay. Do we have any architects? Great. General contractors? People in the trades? Great. Developers? Okay. Nonprofit employees? Great. Housing advocates? Okay. Housing opponents? Okay. Tear it all down. How many people here would like their housing to be more affordable, like need affordable housing? Okay. Great. Okay, so that's a good start. And how many of you, I already asked this, but I want to look again. How many of you already know about community land trusts to some degree? Okay, good. So I think we can move kind of fast then, and we can maybe get more to the discussion. Okay, who here knows nothing about community land trusts? Okay. All right, great. So let's get moving. I may ask people who have really detailed questions that are going to take us off course to like put your question in a parking lot, put it on a sticky note, email me, something like that. Okay, so we're I am working in some capacity as a board member of the Equitable Ann Arbor Land Trust, and we're proposing this as a potential solution, but we would be proposing that a new entity be created for a community land trust if the community would like to do that. This is our board. We have 2 board members here. Raise your hands. Yep, 2 of our board members are here. And we have this aspirations slide where aspiring to have affordability, placemaking, community, mobility and sustainability, and equitable development. I'm going to give you a QR code for the presentation at the end so that you can go through all of this. This one is actually slightly different. So the QR code goes to my full deck because I didn't want to include all the slides for today. So one important framing element that I want to emphasize is that I'm trying to think with a 100-year view. Because even here in Ann Arbor, where I feel like people are often very aspirational, we start discussing some of these ideas and people are like, well, that's never going to happen. Or we can't do that in 2 years, or we can't do that in 5 years. But we really need to take a 100-year view, because this is how you make big changes. And so conveniently, we have this bicentennial coming up next year. So I'm encouraging people to think about what is the Ann Arbor of 2124 going to look like. And we can take steps right now to make that happen. And then it also takes some of the pressure off, because we're all going to be dead. So we don't really have to be so fiercely invested in our own views. Okay, so you're probably going to agree with me if you're here, but there are still people who argue back or who just don't understand the extent of the problem. That we don't just have an affordable low-income housing problem, we have a middle-income problem here. And, you know, my claim is that the private market is now incapable of doing this because there is no profit in middle-income housing. Thus, a private company is not going to develop it. And so, just a couple stats. The median home price, $559 reported in MLive. Your typical 1,000 square foot ranch is going somewhere in the $400,000 range. Lower, higher, but that would be an average. I pulled some data from the MLS. Last year, we had 98 homes that sold for under $300,000 with 3 bedrooms. That's both condos and single-family homes. So I'm anticipating, from what I've seen for sales so far, that there will be about 60 that sell this year. So I would say in the next 2 to 5 years, there will be no homes for sale under $300,000. And then if you run the numbers at 7% interest rates, you have to make more than $100,000 a year to afford a $300,000 home. So essentially, you know, we're looking at complete and total gentrification here in the near future. And so we can sit back and let that happen, or we can look at new ways of approaching housing. It can get worse, you are probably aware, but it's always good to look at these and go, oh my God, are you serious? People pay over $1.3 million for ranches in Berkeley and Boulder. And I think that we are headed in this direction. I think if climate change disasters continue, we're gonna have more people who are gonna be like, hey, let's move to the Midwest. Hey, where do we know that's nice to live in the Midwest? Oh, I've seen, 20 of those best places to live things? Let's go to Ann Arbor. So I think that, and then the other thing to remember about these ranches, a lot of our housing stock was built in the mid-century. And in the next 25 years, it's gonna be hitting 100 years old. And those houses are gonna need so much renovation. The company my husband is working with, the general contractors that are doing whole house renovations or new builds, they're charging like $600 a square foot for infill construction. It's really, like, it is going to get much worse soon, I believe. So,
Works out well for carpenters.
carpenters, yes, yes. So, I believe that these people are going to be shut out of our community entirely. This is going to be like the servant class, the help that commutes in and does their work and leaves. And not only is that repellent to me just on, you know, the level of equity, on a practical level, it really stinks too, because like my nephew, he's an EMT, and he was telling me about the challenges, like the turnover they have, because EMTs are not very well paid. So these are the people who are gonna arrive when you've had a heart attack, or you've fallen down the stairs and broken your leg or something. They show up, they're on 24-hour shifts, they have to sit in an ambulance during their shift. They're paid like $15 an hour to $18 an hour. They can't live here, they're commuting in, the turnover is terrible. Do you want somebody showing up that's been on the job for 45 days who may or may not save your life? We want to be able to retain these people. And I'll give you one more anecdote and then I'm going to discipline myself. But I was on somebody told me that there are a lot of housing stories on the Ann Arbor Mamas Facebook page. So I signed up, and like the second day I checked it, heartbreaking story, especially resonates with me because I used to be a teacher. Someone posted on there and said, I just don't know what to do. My partner is an Ann Arbor teacher. We have 2 small kids. I just overdrew our account buying food, and I can't buy food. And I can't get childcare for 2 kids because it's gonna cost me, what, 30 grand? And my partner's making $45,000 a year. And if I move away, we can never buy here. We're only gonna rent. I can't afford my kids. Not only can Ann Arbor teachers not afford to live in the community, they're food insecure. They can't even afford to have children, let alone have them attend the district that they're teaching in. That's not the kind of community I want to live in. It's just not fair. So, I think the window of opportunity is closing as well, because we are becoming more pro-development, and I support that, but that means that more private developers are going to be here waiting for every single parcel of land, every single development opportunity, and I can't blame them for that, but if we just sit here and say, okay, go ahead, do whatever you want to do, then that's what's going to happen. All these people are going to be gone. So, how can a community land trust help? I have a cute little video. If you get the slide deck at the end, you'll be able to watch the cute little video. Oh, there it is. So Community Land Trust is a nonprofit corporation that holds title to land on behalf of a place-based community, like an area, while serving as the long-term steward for affordable housing, which we're going to mean also includes middle-income housing. Community gardens or other nature areas can be included, civic buildings, commercial spaces. It could include affordable retail for small businesses, and other community assets on the behalf of a community. So there is some legal structure. It's a nonprofit entity, but there's some legal structure where there are deed restrictions on the land and the way the properties are sold. So basically this is what Vienna has been doing for a century. And so that's why it's getting a lot of attention right now, because there's a worldwide housing crisis. And so a lot of people are looking at Vienna because other places have had these structures, social housing or public housing or other names for them, but they're similar to a community land trust. Most of them abandoned those approaches. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, they sold off, they demolished these public nonprofit housing entities, but Vienna did not. They stuck with it, and they have consistently developed housing since the 1920s. It was an outgrowth, it was a response to the devastation of World War I. And in the 1920s, Vienna employed thousands of unemployed people who were living in rubble, and they built 60,000 housing units in a decade there. And then they just continued to build. And they have these beautiful historic structures, they have these modern multifamilies, they have these very dense developments. But as you can see here, 75% of people who live in Vienna, which is a city of 2 million, 75% of people qualify based on their income to live in this housing. So it's a very broad range of access. And over 60% of the 2 million people live in what they call social housing. And because there is so much stock that's run as a nonprofit, then the private market has to temper their prices and match that to some degree. And that's why Vienna is one of the most affordable large cities in the world to live. So I would like to have a Vienna watch party sometime, and we can watch videos and then discuss in between. So I'm really looking forward to that. Another example closer to home is Cincinnati. So just 20 years ago, in 2003, Cincinnati established the Cincinnati Center City Development Corporation. And in just 20 years, they've restored 198 buildings, built 49 new buildings, restored 17 acres of civic space, programmed that civic space, like urban parks, created 2,000 housing units, ta-da. So look what Cincinnati has done. They're not that much bigger than us. They're around 300,000 people. So they have done a lot with a nonprofit development corporation. All right, key features of a community land trust. So the first one would be eligibility. So the main idea is that we're gonna sell or rent housing units at below market prices. So who are you gonna do that for, right? Because if you just say, hey, we're gonna develop housing and sell it for less than it's worth, then you're gonna have a lot of buyers, right? So my proposal, and I'm just proposing my ideas here, I'm assuming that if the community likes this idea, they're gonna pick it up and run with it, and I don't know where it's gonna end up. But my initial proposal is that we make those housing units for people who have lifelong careers in Ann Arbor that are essential to the functioning of the city. So it's basically that list of the people that I said are going to be shut out. And then that's going to be debated, probably heavily, about who we would want to be eligible. I'm proposing that it is a broad range, that it's not just your low-income people, but it's a broad range. And there are a number of reasons for that that we can discuss later. And there will be a new community land trust board. There's a network of community land trusts called Grounded Solutions, and they offer like a 400-page handbook and all kinds of technical assistance. And they recommend that your board consist of 3 kinds of members: residents who live in the community land trust, city officials or representatives from anchor institutions, and then other at-large community members that have expertise that they could lend to the community land trust. And I think this is a much more sustainable model than our current sort of condo association boards, where there can be problems. Like if you only have just a few, 100 families living in a condo association, to field a board can be difficult, and to have the expertise that you need. So the CLT board could oversee all the properties in the city. And we're assuming for now that this is just gonna be the city of Ann Arbor, but it could be anything. Colorado has a statewide community land trust. So, it can be whatever we want it to be. I'm proposing, and EA2 has been very interested in home ownership, because we do seem to still have rental units coming online. That seems to still be viable. But what we think is really disappearing are the home ownership opportunities. And because we live in the Midwest and people can commute in, they may not choose to be lifelong renters. Whereas if you live in a major city, it may be the norm to rent for your whole life. But I don't know that that's really gonna change here. So I'm suggesting that we try to focus on home ownership. Although we could have rental, and we may have like a rent-to-own strategy as well. And then we could include other things beside housing if we wanted to. So the main thing is that the community land trust homes would be permanently affordable, forever, in perpetuity, eternally affordable. So, especially because the community land trust would have deed to the land, even when the building wears out in 100 years or 150 years, then you tear it down and build a new one, and you keep those affordable too. So, in order to do that, the people who buy a community land trust home would have capped equity. You might call it restricted equity, restricted appreciation. Some CLTs called it shared equity, like the community is helping you get this home, you're gonna share the equity with the community. I'm gonna go into detail in a few minutes on how that works. If we do new developments, we may be able to help people lower other costs as well. We might be able to have shared nonprofit Wi-Fi instead of the Wi-Fi being an income source for the landlord. We might be able, if we build net zero developments, then the utility bills should be lower. You might have community gardens, community meals, car shares or bike shares. And I think that we could also address some of the epidemic of loneliness in our society, in that the community land trust would have people working together, networking, governing the units in the community land trust, and hopefully that kind of neighborliness is going to spread around the rest of the community as well and really build the civic fiber of the community. So, broad range of incomes. This is from MISHDA. So you'll see they're using different terms. Affordable housing, they're saying 0 to 30% and 30 to 60% is what they consider affordable housing. And then they're calling sort of this, or actually they're saying all the way up to 80%. And then attainable housing, they're calling 80 to 120% AMI, area median income. And then market rate is 120% or higher. So we're saying the community land trust would target that 60 to 120% area median income range. But I think we can reach down into the, possibly into the 30 to 60% as well. So I know this might be confusing for some people. Does anyone want to ask clarifying questions about this? Okay, you're so smart. Okay, so where would these community land trust homes come from? So on the low end, I think that we could buy existing single-family houses and duplexes, or they could be donated to us if there were people that ever wanted to donate or, you know, sell at a reasonable rate. I think we could prevent house flipping by having a fund that the community land trust is ready and they just buy the houses as soon as they come on the market or before. And then instead of renovating them to the hilt and selling them for the maximum price, you could stabilize the house and then sell it to someone who wants to put some sweat equity in, or, you know, there are various different models that we could do. But I think that would be cool. We could buy duplexes and turn that, you know, do like a little single site condo agreement and sell the each unit in the duplex to a buyer. We could do new single-family home infill on lots, or we could help people add accessory dwelling units to lots that they already own. We could purchase apartment buildings or whole apartment complexes, especially if there are complexes that are townhome style, larger ones. There were a couple of large complexes that were affordable. Their affordability requirements expired and then they all went market rate. If we had been ready, we could have bought those. We should have an entity that knows the status of every single multifamily building in the area and is in contact with the owners and is ready to buy if they're interested in selling. And remember that we can pay a good price, because if we're operating as a nonprofit, we should be able to purchase something. Theoretically, we could purchase something like that and then operate it as a nonprofit and make it work. But the biggest bang for our buck is going to be if we can do new developments and get, you know, 100, 200, 300 or more units at a time, as opposed to the infill, because there's going to be a limit to that. So let's talk about the capped equity, because this is the interesting thing. So, Ann Arbor appreciates at a higher rate than the rest of the region, generally about 5% or more, whereas the rest of the region, it's lower. It's like 1 to 2% appreciation historically. Ballpark I'm talking here. So, I owned both of these homes in the past. Carrie, my friend here, has been in most, were you in both of these?
I've never been to your home and garden.
Okay, so I owned both of these homes. I started thinking about these. So I thought I feel like this is the easiest way, because this is where I had the brainstorm, the breakthrough. So let's imagine we can go back to the year 2000, and we have just established a community land trust. And let's say I'm a new teacher, and I'm trying to decide, where am I gonna live? I can afford a house that costs $125,000. So I could buy this house in Garden City for $125,000 and commute into Ann Arbor for my teaching job. And it's not a bad commute, it's about a half hour, right down I-94, right by the airport. Or someone offers me this new opportunity in a community land trust. They're gonna sell me this cute little 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranch for $125,000. And it's actually worth about $175,000 at the time. So I could decide, which one do I want? So fast forward to 2023, the house in Garden City is now worth about $180,000, okay? Very similar home. The house here in Ann Arbor is now worth about $400,000. But because I decided to go with the community land trust home, I made this deal that I'm now gonna sell that house for $250,000 to someone else who qualifies to live in the community land trust. And I'm gonna go retire in Florida, in a beach house. So, what do you think about this? Let's have a little discussion right now. What do you think about this proposal? Does this make sense to you? Do you think people would do this? What are your reactions?
I think the most important message for the community is that private developers are not going to meet the needs of this missing middle, I call it workforce housing or career housing. I think that once the community understands that, there would be significant political support, and I think that there would be funding available, even state grants, possibly federal grants, and I believe that the University of Michigan, their existing president and board of regents, would also be supportive because they have land, and if they realize that they could work with the community land trust rather than greedy private developers, and I'm just using that term as, trying to change the perception, that they would jump at it.
Okay.
Kathy, I just have to ask, would you have house party rules about a no judgment zone and terminology like greedy as a generalization at this point? I don't think it's appropriate.
Oh, okay, I take greed back. I was simply, more profit oriented than a community land trust.
Yep. Okay, I agree. Other comments, questions?
So, as far as this, the equity rising more in the surrounding region, so if I'm understanding right, part of what would happen with us doing a community land trust is it would sort of artificially lower how much market rates rise in Ann Arbor, right? So it might not be as much as 5%.
I doubt that the establishment of a CLT would impact the private market and lower prices in the private market.
Gotcha. Okay.
Unless anybody here is a trillionaire and is ready to make a very large transfer.
So,
Yes?
So in the example here with the community land trust in Ann Arbor, how is that $250,000 calculated? Like, what's the algorithm there, and like who gets the profit? Yeah, does the homeowner come away with some profit, or?
Yes, so this homeowner, which would have been me, legally cannot sell that house now for $400,000 because there's a deed restriction on it. So they might feel sad about that, but I'm assuming that they were making the choice between living in Garden City and commuting and taking this home. So there will be, the new CLT board will set the policies about the shared equity. And there are a few different ways of doing that. It might be a certain percentage of appreciation. So we might say, you're gonna get 3% appreciation instead of 5%. Or we might say, we're going to calculate, for the years that you owned your home, we're gonna calculate the average rate of appreciation during that period, and we're gonna give you half of that. Or some CLTs peg it to what is affordable for 60% AMI or 80% AMI. Maybe you bought in and you're a 75% AMI income, so that means you have to sell it to someone who's in that same income category when you sell. So Grounded Solutions can offer us technical assistance when we craft these policies, and I'm sure we would do that with community input. Yes?
So every 7 years, the state or county is allowed to reassess a property for property tax valuation purposes. Does this do anything to that assessment to offset the property tax consequences of them assessing a house higher than the CLT value? And if so, or if not, whose shoulders does that fall on? Does it fall on the resident? Does it fall on the CLT itself to resolve that tax?
So I see an appointment with the city assessor in my future. And I have not had that appointment yet. But if you are legally restricted from selling a home at the market rate, I would assume that it couldn't be assessed by the city at a higher rate. But
Well, yeah, that's just kind of one thing I was looking for. And then I guess the other, is there like a ballparky estimate of what percentage is gonna go to transitory housing for students versus semi-permanent housing for career people?
so sadly, I don't think we could allow students in the community land trust.
Well, I'm just talking about like if you're gonna do apartment complexes in there, like, how would you even legally prevent students from becoming tenants in them?
So we're gonna have to have, so other community land trusts, they have restrictions about who can buy in. Like you have to be eligible. So you have to address fair housing laws, but there are gonna be restrictions about who can buy. So the university has housing. They are building more housing, and we are lobbying them to build even more housing. And the private market is building student housing. So I don't believe the Community Land Trust has a role in addressing student housing right now.
Or
You
any
can
other
try to
sort of
convince me
transitory
otherwise.
housing?
What was that?
Or any other nature of transitory housing? Because apartment complexes are typically transitory in nature. You're not really planning to live your whole life in an apartment, correct?
Right. So I think that if we were doing new developments, I don't think we would be building housing like apartment stock like you typically see here. We would be building something more like condo developments. Hopefully, it might be the row home townhouse style, or it might be a multifamily building that has condos that are a little bit larger, because we do want people to want to live in them. So those are all the messy details that are gonna have to be worked out.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we've got 4 more questions and then we're gonna move on. Chris?
I think my broad question / comment is, this is reminiscent of Arrowwood, which is a cooperative unit. Those are now illegal, under current state law, but Ann Arbor has shown support for that in the past. People, and actually, I have a coworker who lives there, and she says, I can't afford to buy anywhere else, and broadly, it seems people like living there. how does this compare, do you think about it in terms of past Ann Arbor efforts at cooperative housing, other models?
I think there would be a lot of similarities. My understanding is that co-ops are no longer legal to build in the state of Michigan. We believe that we could set these up under condo agreements, but it would be very similar. I'm proposing that we have a broader range of incomes and that hopefully we can do a lot of developments and they will all be a broad range of mixed incomes. Whereas before, I think there's been a real scarcity mindset, like, oh, we're probably only gonna build this one, so we're gonna make it all super affordable. But we think that it can be a better outcome and that you can have broader public support for the public investment if it's a broader range of incomes. Yes?
So do people be penalized for like changing careers, or would you expect a certain career from you were a teacher when you became a super successful real estate agent?
Darn it! Why do you have to bring that up? I think that is gonna be one of the most difficult things to resolve. Because what we want is to be like Vienna right now, where there's so much supply that that's not really an issue. I read this enviable anecdote in one of the news stories about Vienna where this woman and her husband were profiled and they bought in, when they were very low income, but you only income qualify once in Vienna. Once you're in, you can stay your whole life and they never check your income again. And so now they were about to retire and their housing payment was like 3% of their total income. And they live in this cute little, it was only like 750 square feet, so, we Americans, we don't go for that. But, yeah, like they were so comfortable financially because their incomes had grown. So, I'd love to see that to be our long-term goal. So the question is, are we gonna start that way? And are we gonna be really aggressive about building the supply rapidly? Or are we going to have some other agreement? So one in-between strategy might be that there's like an HOA fee that is like your community land trust fee and your HOA fee wrapped into one. And maybe if your income goes up, that fee increases somewhat relative to your income so that we can beef up the fund, but you stay. I don't know. Those are gonna be thorny issues about how we set it up. Yes?
I really like what you presented, especially the opportunity for ownership. The ability to get that down payment to even own is tough for some people. And right now, if you try to save up, you can't keep up, catching up for the down payment. So I'm very interested in what you mentioned, that having gone into in detail yet, and maybe it's on a future slide, is the rent-to-own concept. Is there a way to get a foothold in before you've saved up enough and then convert to ownership?
So one of the reasons, what was that?
That's typically leasing with an option to buy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons we're looking at a lease option or rent-to-own strategy is that it is difficult to get financing for a large new development that's for sale. And it's much easier, especially in a really strong market like Ann Arbor, to get a big construction loan and financing for a rental property. So maybe we do that just to get the financing, and then we have these rent-to-own, like we've been talking about, like a conversion rate. Like once there are 50% of the tenants who are ready to convert, we switch over to condo, or maybe we can just do it unit by unit. So there's that possibility. The other thing is, I don't know how many of you were aware of the council resolution a year or so ago about these alternative mortgage programs. One of them is NACA, the Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, and they have a no down payment, no PMI loan, and it's character-based underwriting. So they look at the whole person and their situation, and they're a discounted rate. So we've talked with them. they are excited about working in Ann Arbor, especially with new construction, so that's an option. And then another interesting possibility is the idea of a large municipal bond that would be the construction loan for a new development and possibly hold some of the mortgages, like create our own mortgages through a municipal bond or a portion of that, so that people could do that rent-to-own structure. So there are a lot of possibilities. Let's come back to that, okay? Was there one more question that I promised, or did we get everybody? Okay, so the other really exciting thing is that if you live in the city and your commuting costs are significantly reduced from that 25-mile drive, 50 miles round trip to Garden City that I was doing, if I could eliminate a car, either go from 2 cars to 1 car or 1 car to 0 cars, I did the calculators, and if I was super disciplined and I invested all that car expense, which is about $650 a month by the time you pay the car payment, do all the maintenance, pay for the gas and all of that, and I had a little savings from the Community Land Trust, like lower cost Wi-Fi. So I said, if you were saving around $750 a month by being able to live in town, and you religiously invested that over a 30-year career, and I'm not saying everybody can do this, your portfolio would be worth about $1 million after 30 years. So you would have a $1 million retirement account, and I know this is staggering, but if we go from now to present to future value of a $250,000 home, in 30 years, that $250,000 home at a restricted rate is going to be worth about $600,000. And that's going to be affordable in 30 years. So you would be able to sell, if you wanted to sell your home and go to that little beach shack in Florida, you could cash out $600,000 and have your $1 million, and hopefully you've got some kind of a retirement account from your work. Who knows these days? But so you could. It is possible to have a much more secure future. And I'll tell you, I got 2 teenage drivers right now, and the car thing is killing me, absolutely killing me. So I think this could be a proposal for a much healthier community. Less housing stress, less financial stress, less displacement, less loneliness, stronger social networks, stronger families and friendships, and ultimately a stronger democracy locally, and then hopefully that will spread. So I'm excited about the possibilities. Now, how are we gonna pay for this? It hit me, Ann Arbor's a great place to build affordable and middle income housing. And here's why. We are not a disinvested community. We are a privileged community. We have strong anchor institutions. We have a strong economy. The University of Michigan is never going anywhere. They're not going to move. Here's key. Here's something really key. Our housing prices are higher than construction costs. Whereas if you are trying to build in Saginaw or Detroit or Kalamazoo or any other disinvested community, the cost to build a house is more than most of the average homes. So that's a problem. Every single thing that they build there has a huge financial gap. Whereas here, the reason we have so many developers coming is because you can build something and then you can sell it for a profit. So we can use that to our advantage. We also have high property taxes. Hooray, right?
That's just the thing that makes you want to buy a house.
Yeah. So here's the magic. If you build something dense, a dense development, and you have that property tax that you can capture, then you can actually pay for some of this. So let's take a look. And if we couple this with the community land trust. All right, so how many of you know what tax increment financing is, or brownfield development? Okay, so most of you already know. So let's take a hypothetical 100-unit new community land trust development, okay? It's gonna cost around ballpark $52 million to build, or more. We could have 5 levels of affordability. We could sell 20 condos at $100,000, 20 at $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, and $500,000, and we still couldn't pay for it. But if we created what's called a redevelopment TIF, and we captured some of that taxes, here's the interesting thing. If we build this building, it's gonna last for at least 100 years. And if we have these 100 units, they will, over 100 years, create $240 million of tax revenue that comes into the city coffers over 100 years. So, the public policy question for the community is, would you be willing to take $22 million of that tax revenue and get a loan on it to build this development and sell these condos at these prices? Does anybody want to ask questions about what I just explained? Yes.
Is that legally possible now in this county?
It is. There is new legislation. It was possible before through a vehicle facilitated by the State Land Bank of Michigan, but there's new legislation that was just signed a couple of months ago that this is just like a brownfield development, just like a brownfield TIF. We can do this, and almost 100% of the cost of the development can be captured, or can be used, the TIF can be used for those costs. So it is 100% legal. So what do you think about this public policy choice? This is a big change. This is a significant use of public funds that would take tax revenue away from the city. And we need tax revenue to run the city. So this is not something we can do lightly, and this is not something that we've done before. We've done this a little bit to support affordable housing in a small way, but it was for very, very low income affordable housing. So this would be a big change to start using tax dollars to build middle income housing. Yes?
Have you considered proposing this to the state to see if we can get excess pandemic funding as opposed to city funding, which would provide a lower tax impact to the property themselves?
So there is a fund for that right now. That funding is almost gone. Even if we did that, it would only support maybe 1 or 2 developments. So,
I'm just wondering if you
Yeah.
can already hit that channel.
So, I mean, there's nobody out there that's gonna save us. But the community, the city, we have this under our control because we can tax and we can decide how those taxes are used. So this is possible if the community really wants to do it.
Okay, let's look at the math again. So, some of the money is coming from the sale of units, and some of the money, about half and half in this example,
Yes.
is coming from the TIF.
Mhm.
If we bond, instead of taking the whole 23 million right now out of our tax coffers, we bond for that, what's the payment cost over time for that?
Yes, so that's another thing. We can do a bond and the tax increment financing, and it would be complementary, and it would save additional because we could probably get a much better rate on the municipal bond than we could from a private lender or a bank. So let's not go into all of that now, but yes. Yes.
I really appreciate how you've taken the time to take a very complex problem and define it, and humans tend to try to oversimplify most problems because it's easier to solve a simple problem than a complex one. But here, you're really trying to solve a complex problem with many options, and I appreciate that. The community is frequently against using tax dollars that are coming from lower income people to support wealthier people. But in this case, that's a simplistic term, we're really, by building this, we say, for example, we're creating an additional $100 million of tax revenue for the city, but we're just taking a small percentage of it away. So if we did nothing, the city would be out $100 million in taxes. Is that correct?
Well, it's also kind of on a case-by-case basis where you look at the specific development and you say, would this be developed by a private market developer, and would the tax revenue be $500 million? Because they're going to make all the condos, they're going to sell all the condos at at $900,000 each. Right now, I don't believe in a lot of cases we're at that stage. We may be at that stage some point. But I believe, we're not going to have any problem selling these, right?
Right.
So I believe that we could build more densely in the near future than the private market will. And that would offset that. But we still need private developers in Ann Arbor to build those luxury buildings and be a big tax revenue cash cow to offset this. All right, I'm gonna move on. So another way to skin this cat would be to do market rate housing. So say we still have 100 units, say we sold 25 at $100,000 each, 25 at $200,000 each, and then we sold 25 at $800,000 and 25 at $1 million. So these high-end ones, there's no public money used here, so these high-end ones subsidize these lower cost units. So it's 50-50. What do you think about that scenario? Yes?
I'm curious, between the two, is there any point after cumulative developments that either revenue from the CLT overall can help self-fund future things, or will it
Yes.
always be that? Because this seems like a really great starting point for proof of concept to then get to the previous proposition of the TIF, right?
Yes, I think we could hopefully get to that point. So, a private developer would have a comfortable margin of profit. A nonprofit developer might have like a 10% or 5 to 10% profit to, operate their business. So there are a couple ways we could do this. We can bring in nonprofit developers or offer an RFP and choose, like the city is doing with some others. They execute the project, and that might be the way to go, because we could have lots of different projects going on, hopefully. Or we can make the CLT a nonprofit developer itself. So maybe we do both. But the CLT as the nonprofit developer, especially if there's a bond that can be used, and if we use tax increment financing, the CLT could be in a strong position to do some nonprofit development themselves, and that would be the most cost-efficient way to do it. But we might not be able to get the scale that we want.
No, but upkeep, maintenance, and everything else down the road is in-house as well. You don't have to go out for that. You have in-house expertise.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you think University of Michigan and Michigan Medicine would take this and leverage this against the incomes of the professionals working there as a justification to pay them less to do so, since they are such a gigantic cornerstone of the community's employment status as a whole? And do you think that would disproportionately affect the number of people needing these lower units versus the number of people that can afford the higher subsidized units?
If we get to that point, that will be a very good problem to have. I don't think, I mean, it's gonna be really incremental, so I don't think it will move the needle enough. I don't think we would be there for another 50 years. Question?
It's, I think, worth noting that the unit that's selling for $100,000 is not the same type of unit that's selling for $800,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, correct?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sorry, finish.
No, I was just going to say, to respond to your question or concern, I think one of the problems that the university has right now is, frankly, that it's not providing the income increases, the compensation increases to its employees that can keep up with the increase in, let's say, total cost of affordability in housing, which is the cost of the housing with the utilities, with transportation costs, and the opportunity cost of time lost in transit. And so that's why there's a lot of pressure with the university from GO, from nurses unions, et cetera, for higher wages, because there is no housing that people can afford here, and therefore they have to live far away, and therefore maybe their utility costs are higher because it's lower housing stock, and they're spending a lot of time for transportation costs, as Sarah pointed out earlier.
Okay, let's keep going. You have a question?
Just one quick question, would the market rate sales then not be part of the cap in terms of the amount of value they
No,
accrue?
they wouldn't be.
They'd be separated from?
So this exact scenario is somewhat problematic. Like, do you really want, I don't know, are these people gonna get along? Are they gonna be annoyed at each other? How different are the units gonna be? I don't know. So maybe you could do a slightly different one. Maybe it wouldn't be so dramatic. Maybe you'd have them at $300,000 and $400,000 and then $700,000. I don't know. There are a lot of different ways we could try to arrange this, but this starts to become problematic.
I would suggest that every day we are dealing with people, workers, you know, people of higher income intersect with workers in all of those categories. Now, whether they treat them well or not, they function with each other. And I think it's different than when you sort of have the back door for,
Yeah.
like in New York City where they have a separate entrance. I just,
Yeah.
I'd like to believe, I'd like to believe that we could pull this off.
Yeah, this was sort of the starkest example that I just
Yeah,
came up. I came up with this last night at like 12:15. So. Okay, Carrie.
So, a question about this, and I realize it's kind of an extreme example, but would all 100 of those buyers be entering into a community land trust deed restriction agreement?
So I don't think the upper end could or would. I mean, those would be market rate units. So they, by definition, wouldn't be part of the CLT.
So I guess my question is, maybe this is a moot, but like, are they entering into an agreement knowingly subsidizing lower units?
Yes.
And like, I just have a hard time thinking that people would enter into that agreement.
I think they're doing it at Viridian. There's a similar structure.
That's a good
at
point.
Viridian,
Yep.
Okay.
And we're not opting it
Okay.
because of the larger vision.
Yeah.
So you have to sell a vision to do this.
Yes.
I appreciated the slide you had a few before this, where you talked about I think it's 5 bullet ways that housing stock can enter the control of the CLT. And this was the last bullet, right, was these 2 big buildings.
Yeah.
And these are inspiring and bold, and I think would set us on the path toward Vienna. And where I've heard excitement from housing activists in the past is for like a smaller approach at first, like what they have in Oakland or in Vermont or something, where it's individual buildings and tenants taking control of something, keeping it affordable in perpetuity. I hope we can do both, but I would hate for like the complex details of the really big projects to slow down getting some first proof of concept wins in and getting something up and running that people can get excited about. So no knock on this, I think this is great, but I'd love to have it be both and not lose sight of the small piece of property that we could make happen immediately.
I agree. I would love to see this up and running and have people living in units within 12 months.
What's keeping you from that?
I have no money. Do I have what? Of how many units we could have in 12 months?
How much money?
Oh, how much money? I would like $1 million.
1 million would get you started on this?
Yes.
Well, there's a check in this room right now.
I will accept checks, and I have Venmo.
What's the transaction cost $1 million?
I have no idea. All right, so yes, let's get to the how you can take action. I like these people who go straight to action.
Just one quick relating to what was just said. I'm concerned if you do this quickly, that what's going to happen is the lowest price of housing in this neighborhood are the areas that are the most diverse, and they are being blanched out, is my term. And we have not done a good job with retention on the west side and the north side, and we didn't focus on that. And if that isn't an intention built in here, what you're going to be, it's already happening over in Bryant and Packard and Platt, that graduate students, well-intentioned, are buying property they can afford. I understand it, but they're displacing existing communities with community integrity. And that's what you lose. I mean, we have, the rest of the town ships sands. Those neighborhoods traditionally, and the remaining little pockets, have a lot of community integrity that is different than the rest. And I would be concerned that if you fast track this, the first thing that's going to happen is that you are going to be predating on existing communities that are diverse.
So I would hope that we wouldn't do that. I'm hoping to create new housing stock for the most part. So that is very important to me, and I think we need to really take that into account. I think one of the near-term possible negative side effects is sort of like opportunity hoarding, where people who are very networked and aware would be jumping on these community land trust units and suddenly have a calling to childcare so that they can get a condo in Ann Arbor and shutting out people who, that is a little bit of a concern of mine. Because I think we really do want this to be a method of expanding opportunity for people who haven't had opportunities, and decreasing economic segregation and having a diverse, socioeconomically, racially, all kinds of diversity in the city. So I do think we need to be really intentional about that.
I would suggest that if you could provide a mechanism for people to stay in their home by transitioning their ownership to a land trust, that would be one.
Yes, that is a possibility. It's called a life trust, or a life estate. What is it? Does anybody know? There are mechanisms for doing that. So yes, we want to do all kinds of things. And I scare people when I tell them about all the things. So I'm curious to do a quick survey. How many of you think that if we did a new development or have new units, you really want to see them be for sale versus rental? Right off the bat, for sale. Who wants to see that? And who's comfortable with rental or rent to own down the road? So about half and half. Okay. I believe if we did like that 100-unit development at those price levels, that we could get what are called pre-sales, where people would be willing to reserve a unit and put a deposit. But it might be, so like a development like that might take 2 years. So do you think we could get pre-sales for construction that's like 18 months out? How many people think that's feasible? No? Maybe?
Whether or not people have the liquidity.
Yeah, I know. Because the lower price units are the more rare, and those would be the most likely people to jump on it, but they are the least likely to have the money to jump on it.
And they provide you
Yeah.
the least revenue in your development.
Yeah, so I don't know. We got to work out the kinks, but.
Yeah.
it comes in, like rent to own gives that pathway because that cash flow is just very difficult in that lower margin. But I also, like, we were talking about banks traditionally, but I think credit unions are really actually looking to fill this void and being creative about, even like deposits on rent, right? If you need a 2 months rent deposit, credit unions often, I've had, a few conversations, are interested in saying, we'll cover those 2 months, like as a loan, because you don't have 2 months rent, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of people are playing paycheck to paycheck.
Mhm.
So maybe there's a relationship similar that like credit unions are happy with that bridge loan to allow that point of entry in a pre-sale. But my first reaction is it's probably gonna be that lease to sale to really give that access point for more people.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think if we're talking about the demographics that are going to be able to do something like this, we would want to avoid pre-sales, right? Because you're filtering out people that might not have that money for a long period of time.
Yeah.
That's really true.
So these are the details that we're gonna have to work, and they're big, big details. So let's start to wrap up here. How do we make a community land trust a reality? So for you community members, you are gonna need to ask City Council and our anchor institutions to support a community land trust. I have had initial conversations with officials, and you talk about tax increment financing and bond financing with tens of millions of dollars, and they get pretty nervous about that, because that is a big use, a big scary jump for the use of public funds. Like a municipal bond, the city is guaranteeing with our tax dollars that we are gonna repay that municipal bond. So the community is gonna have to lead if they want this. It's gonna have to be a lot of people who say, yes, we want to go down this path. And then the leaders will follow. I have a link for people who want to join the Community Land Trust housing list. You wanna get on the waiting list, because I would like to be able to show people that we are building a list. I'd like to, within 6 months, I'd like to have 1,000 people or more on a waiting list, or 5,000 people, so. And we would love to have people who would like to invest early on in the Community Land Trust at sort of a social impact rate of return. For City Council members, we would like our City Council to support the creation of a nonprofit community land trust and appoint officials and staff to sit on the board of that CLT. And we would like them to approve significant TIF and bonds at some point when they're comfortable. Hopefully soon. And for anchor institutions like the University of Michigan, like Ann Arbor Public Schools, the county, who else? Large employers. We would like them, churches, anyone with land that can be used, we would like them to utilize their land, like with a redevelopment that has more height, that people can live above it. I would love to see some of the schools, some of those single-story schools redeveloped to several stories. I would like to see churches with excess land break off a few little lots, and you could do some infill there. I think we could have a big spectrum, and then of course we want the university to contribute in some way. So we'd like the anchor institutions to contribute land, assist with financing, and connect their employees to the CLT.
Are there any zoning, like reconfigurations that would need to happen to allow for the larger density?
We are already going in that direction. There is a new comprehensive plan in the works, so there will be more opportunities for that. We have this transit-oriented zoning that has been created along a couple of corridors. So we have accessory dwelling unit ordinances, so we do have a lot of opportunities right now that we can begin acting immediately.
Rather than contributing the land, could, say, the university provide a 99-year lease?
Yes.
Okay, that's something.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so those are the ways to take action, and then I have QR codes for you. If you know how to do that, if you have an iPhone, you can just use your camera and point it at this. And right over here, if you want to, you don't need to do both, so choose one. You want to put your name on the CLT list, or you are already housed and you're not going to buy a new house and you just want to become a supporter. We want to be able to communicate with you and rally the advocates. And then if you hate this idea, there's an option for you too.
Where's the link take you to?
I'm not going to tell you.
Survey monkey, I'm calling it now.
So other questions? Well, and then I have one more slide here that's the link to the whole original slide deck that's slightly different than the one I just showed you. So you can do that one if you want to be able to access these. And then my email is up there if you want to email me as well. You can take a picture of this slide and email me later if you have any problems.
One quick comment, just yesterday at one of these events, Jen Hall from the Ann Arbor Housing Commission suggested that they're going to be looking at city bonds to deal with the construction, the rising construction costs, because it would give them a better rate of,
Yes.
better interest rates. So it seems like there might be an opportunity there to have yet another meeting.
I actually told her that I would love to get in on her bond, but
Well,
she hasn't called me back, so I don't know.
Set the groundwork.
Sarah, do you
Yes.
want me to put these on the house party website or the Eventbrite? So
Sure.
if anybody's not scanning right now and you want access
Yeah.
later, I can make sure to share them out again.
That would be great.
Thank you.
And I'm going to move on to the last one. That's the link to the slide deck. If you find that you can edit it, please don't. Okay, we're done 10 minutes early, so feel free to come write checks or ask other questions or have fiery debates about some of these public policy issues. And hopefully we're going to have more of these sessions. I'm anticipating that we're going to need to have a dozen or more eventually to, if this has legs, if people want to move forward with it, we're going to have to do a lot of advocacy and education in the community and build consensus around this idea. So feel free to go and proselytize at will and
Get robes?
no robes yet. We should get t-shirts. Yard signs. All right, thank you for coming.
Thank you.